Hello, my name is Ryan, and it's been much too long. I have finally completed my move from upstate New York all the way to the sunny, hot coasts of St. Kitts and Nevis. I'm here supporting my fiancée as she finishes her final semester of veterinary school. Writing this, I'm finishing up my first week after my move and my creative flow has started to return to me. I know I have plenty of video series that have been on hold for a while, and for those who have been patiently waiting for these, I humbly apologize, and ask you wait just a little bit longer. For people who are interested in my new side channel, I can say I'm aiming to work on a new video for this soon, so stay tuned. Today though, I'm going to talk about a very personal journey of mine. This is going to be a bit different than my other content thus far, but at the heart of it, it couldn't be more intertwined. I'm a writer. If this is a surprise for you, well, there you have it. I've been writing books for what seems like forever, and that very topic is going to be the main focus of today. August 27th, 2012 was the day when I changed my life for one of the most dramatic shifts. I decided I wanted to write and become an author. This decision took place when I was in my sophomore year of high school, having just moved schools after my parents had split up after their divorce. For a period of time before this, my aspirations laid in law and becoming a lawyer. I was taken in by various stories of law, with the two largest being the Ace Attorney series of video games and the book A Civil Action by Jonathan Harr, which discusses the case of Anderson v. Krajewak, in which a lawyer named James Slipman comes to be embroiled in a long and tumultuous legal battle against a local tannery named Krajewak for the contamination of the groundwater. Now, obviously, one does not make a law career out of two sets of stories they liked. It can be a first step, sure, but it soon became clear to my young mind that it was not the actual act of performing and practicing law that had captured my attention, but instead, the story. It seemed like such a simple realization in how much the story had grabbed me, coupled with my desire to consume as many stories as I could and wolf through books as quickly as possible to find the next amazing story out there. I then thought to myself, I could do that on my own. Now, of course, writing is a very arduous process that involves a lot of skill, patience, and precision. This was not something that my 16-year-old self was adept at, yet. The best way to learn to write well is to write poorly, and to read others who do write well. It was around this time that I'd encountered one of my favorite stories of all time, the Nintendo DS visual novel, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. This is the first in the Zero Escape trilogy, and I've talked about it in no short terms here on this channel, and this was one of those stories that just hit me in my core, and inspired me with my previous dreams to finally make this story that I had in my heart. So, what is one fan to do when they're so heavily inspired by a story, and they wish to begin writing, and they're not really all that good at it? Simple. You copy it. My first writing began as essentially a copy of 999's story, although there did exist a small sampling of originality, as I didn't want to write the story one-to-one. So I made my own characters and utilized the setting and the concept of the Nonary game to craft my own story. Was it good? No, not at all. I've talked about this a few times on this channel as well, but instead of primarily using dialogue tags, I assigned each character a color and used that to denote who was speaking. A bit whimsical, but nothing I'd do in this day and age. Because the concept was so closely married to Zero Escape, this novella was basically just a worse version of the original story with new faces and a slightly different ending. Concepts like Ice 9 and the morphogenetic field are carried over word for word. I think in part just because I wanted to know more about them, so this was my excuse to research deeper into the topics. This novella and its 3 sequels, yes, 3 sequels, were important to me because it gave to me the name and general form of my first male protagonist, Gavin Daniels. At this time, he was the Chunpei stand-in, but in order to clash a bit with his look-alike, I intended to make him a bit more brash and illogical. Someone who acted on emotions first rather than logic. It doesn't show too well in this novella because I was a novice who didn't know how well to transcribe those feelings, but later iterations of the character in published novels would see these qualities exhibited. Overall, the novella lasted about 80 pages and just over 13,000 words. It's pretty short for a novella, but for me, it was the longest piece of work I'd ever written. I was so proud of it that I immediately set out to write a second. This was still early 2012, a few months before my official work began on any of my published works, but I wouldn't let those future events cloud my passion. And passion there was. 02 Darksiders was me branching out into completely new territory. It wasn't a direct ripoff of Zero Escape, so I had the freedom to make new settings, ideas, and develop characters in ways I hadn't seen on the screen. Since this story is more different than its predecessor, I'll go into more of the detail on the plot and characters here, since there is at least an original identity, even if that identity is smellier than 3 weeks old tuna paste and not sun. 02 takes place 6 months after the events of the Nonary game in December 2017. Gavin Daniels recollects on the game and its creator, Jack Adada. Jack here is a familiar name that will survive past this set of novellas, much like Gavin does, and if anything, it's interesting to see the man who will become one of my greater villains' humble beginnings here. Anyway, Jack Adada is part of a grand company called Adada Inc., who hosts games like these and other unexplained operations. Really good writing there, me. That's basically my shortcut for whatever the rest of he decides to do. I don't know, I'll get to that when I get to that. Anyway, Gavin escapes the Titanic II, a replica of the original RMS Titanic with the surviving members of the game: Adam Jackson, the Santa stand-in, Gracie Jackson, the Akane Kurashiki stand-in, Tom Hadley, who was closest to a snake stand-in, and Alice, who was, for all intents and purposes, Alice from Virtue's Last Reward, but legitimately the priestess of Amun-Ra. Was this integrated at all into her character, other than makes her unusual? No. This was an extremely poor attempt at blending other cultures into my writing, which is a common theme in these novellas, as they have a definite Egyptian slant toward its mythos, but I wouldn't say it's well integrated. This story begins as the survivors, thankfully finding their way back to the mainland somehow. I'm not joking, it literally just says they ended up in some jungle where the replica boat was built, and some random explorers found them, who happened to be exploring the area. Ooh boy, I had completely forgotten about that part. There was no extra setup or foreshadowing for this. I really just needed my crew back in the US, and I didn't have the time to come up with an explanation. The gang is about to celebrate Christmas when the entire roof of the apartment building that they're in is torn off and a helicopter is hovering above. And a bunch of masked cultists, yes, you heard me right, masked cultists, kidnap Gracie because they want to kidnap Gavin, and he said no. These cultists, by the way, are the Darksiders from the title, if you didn't guess, and they're also being paid off by Jack Adada to perform said kidnapping. Very publicly and very not subtly, by way of ripping off an entire apartment building. You get my point. Even though this story is technically more original, that does not necessarily mean it is good. We're gonna speed along here. The group starts to research the Darksiders, encounter them, swap Gavin for Gracie, and then Gavin is bound to a stone obelisk in a very public park as they perform their ritual to bring their god, Harsisis, back to the mortal realm through Gavin's flesh. The Darksiders leader, Red-Eye, reveals that one of the previous Nonary game survivors, numbered 9, and overall General McDoucheface, Luke, is alive and well and totally not dead. I had to go back to the original document to remember that he died off screen, so I must have felt like such a genius bringing him back. Luke had history with Adam and Gracie, being a student at Gracie's school before the games, and as she had put it, he kept trying to get with me before, unsuccessfully. So that tells you all you really need to know about Luke. Anyway, the next scenes follow Gracie and Alice as they plot and scheme to infiltrate the Darksiders, who are performing, again, very publicly in the local park. Reminds me of the old This Is My Milwaukee LARP sessions, although, funnily enough, this was written long before I ever learned of those. Alice goes undercover to attempt to join the Darksiders to gather the information, and her exchange with Akhenaten, the real name of Red-Eye, goes as follows. Hey, pretty cool cult you have here. Thanks, made it myself. Can I join? You look Egyptian enough. Yay! Alice is then taken to meet the pharaoh of the cult, who, if you can feel the dramatic tension building, is a possessed Gavin. Ah! He immediately denounces Alice's membership, and she gaslights, gatekeeps, and girl bosses them by saying they know literally nothing about Egyptian culture. Wow, I wonder if that's a subconscious dig at anyone in particular, huh? More culty shenanigans ensue, and they are able to remind Gavin of who he is and manage to rescue him. Notice how Tom or Adam have done kind of fuck all for the story thus far? This is a pattern that will continue forward. Anyway, Gavin's back, but not fully himself. He has dreams of a premonition that will be overtaken by Harsisis and execute all of his friends in 11 days' time. He doesn't know what to do, but, you know, Possessie's gonna be possessed. In the meantime, Gracie and Gavin decide to do some research on Egyptian legends to see if there's anything that can help them. Utilizing the internet, and not the very real Egyptian priestess, because, you know, we dropped that thread as an important long ago, they do manage to find some information on one of the Egyptian gods, Khepri, who, for quick notice, is a deity who represents the morning sun and has a large scarab on their face. They call it cool and move on, but find the information on rituals that relates to their very situation has been mysteriously deleted. And Gavin is losing control of himself as the spirit within gropes for power. Melodrama happens, people wonder if they're going to be able to save it in time, Alice gets a mysterious email in hieroglyphics. Yes, we're not going to stop to parse that, and the crew discover how to expel the spirit from Gavin's body. They travel to the park again, which has that same obelisk where the spirit was bound to Gavin, and perform the ritual to unbind him. But plot twist! Akhenaten was on scene, and he receives the rejected spirit, and also reveals that he was a human vessel for the god Ra, meaning the merger with Harsisis has created Ra-Harakti. The new god fusion gives humanity 2 days to live before fleeing into a gigantic pyramid that raises itself out of the ground. Man, San Francisco's housing prices are gonna be fucked. But at least he was kind enough to give him 2 days to prepare. Gavin, meanwhile, feels like he's totally prepared to the chagrin of his crew, accepts the god's challenge. You remember that acting on emotion rather than logic thing? This was an attempt to show that. Ra-Harakti says he finds no joy in a fight against a mortal unless it's a fair fight, as it would be all too simple to kill him there and then. AKA, I don't know how to give Gavin power to fight a god, so I've made the god weaken himself on purpose. He grants Gavin a scimitar and appears in his human shape. As Gavin is promptly getting his butt handed to him, he hears a voice telling him to strike left, and he does, managing to catch a hit on the god's face. The voice reveals itself to be Luke, and immediately Ra-Harakti vanishes. Luke reveals that he was brought back to life because of the Nonary game, as its purpose was to connect human souls to a resonant Egyptian god. Gavin's was Harsisis. Khepri, that scarab-faced one we talked about earlier, was Luke's, and as Khepri has control over the morning sun, he can temporarily send Ra-Harakti away so they can talk. He reveals that everybody was chosen by an Egyptian god, and the intention was to imbue them with spirits of ultimate power. Now, you may think, well, this seems overly complicated, and not really all that well thought out. Yes, you may also think, oh, but what are the other gods that chose the others who participated in the Nonary game? I don't remember. It's been much too long, and honestly, I'm pretty sure this became a drop plot point. By and large, the situation is also revealing that Jakadada was imbued with the spirit of Seth, and that Gavin had to resonate with the spirit of Harsisis from within Ra-Harakti to take him down and then head for Jack. Anywho, returning to the climactic fight, Gavin figures getting the Angry God fusion even angrier would make him lose focus enough to win, and wow! It works! Oh, we end this off with this gem of a finishing line.
Curse you, mortal! How were you able to beat me?
Because fuck you. brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And Gavin is able to return to Gracie and the rest. I don't even remember if I mentioned it, but Gracie and Gavin are a couple. Usual single young child's wish fulfillment. It's not a developed romance in the slightest, but also thankfully it's not that harmful or gross either. It's there, it exists, but it doesn't do anything more than that. And so ends 02 Darksiders. Next up, we're going to move on to 03 Rise and Fall. And I knew that it had been way too much original storytelling in 02, so this story was going to return to its roots of taking the more heavy inspiration from Zero Escape, as this story is basically Virtue's Last Reward. Gavin wakes up with a new nonary game and some new and old faces, this time including Alice, a previous player of the past nonary game who died and went under the name Number 7, an old man, a young woman, and this mysterious person in a suit named M. This is a near perfect analog to VLR's cast, so I'm not going to go into super depth here. Zero was a story that wasn't really original, but there were some diversions from 999's plot to at least see the vision that was slightly being attempted for. 03 is practically a word-for-word retread of Virtue's Last Reward in 80 pages, and in the interest of not dropping spoilers for that game, I'm going to move on to the final story, Zero End. Zero End features Gavin sending his mind through time into the past to the time of the first nonary game and to the time of the Promethean Nights, a subset of scientists working at Adata Inc. who are responsible for the game's production. I should note that even though this whole story has been hugely Zero Escape inspired, this was written before Zero Time Dilemma dropped, so unfortunately, my grubby little 16-year-old writing hands could not copy Zero Time Dilemma's plot word for word. Anyway, back in this time, he meets with younger versions of the three scientists, Jack Adata, Johnson Brave, and Mason Radica. Keep this last name in mind, as it's another name that's going to resurface in the newer books. Anyway, yada yada yada, trials and tribulations. Gavin manages to return to the present with enough evidence to send the police to raid the Nevada test site. Yes, you could not pay me to even begin to continue the trend of quote-unquote originality 02 brought forward, but in the end, everyone lives happily ever after. And thus, my 4 novellas were done. I knew they weren't original, as I made no efforts to get them published, but I was proud for writing over 320 pages within a few months span. That amount was insane to me, and I felt like it was a step toward writing the stories I wanted to find deep within me. So it was at this time that I joined up with Fiction Press. Now, this arc of my story I've told a little bit about in the foreword to one of my much later novels, The Corpse of Icarus. To risk repeating myself, I'm going to play that footage now. My love for reading grew, and it evolved into the desire to create stories of my own. I researched online all different kinds of places on the subject. I couldn't tell you what kinds of sites I went to, since it never really was for longer than a few minutes. The fire I'd been feeling wasn't satiated by what they had to offer in advice or platform. That was, until I stumbled onto Fiction Press. For the uninitiated, Fiction Press is a site home to the budding writers of all sorts of different platforms and genres, and even houses forums for communities to come together and share their works. Stories could be posted and reviewed by other members. Funnily enough, my profile in Fiction Press is still online. However, I'm not going to share my account name, as I'm a bit too shy to freely condone that work going out to the public. But I'm not so shy as to delete it forever, so consider it a gift you can cringe at if you can find it. It shouldn't be too hard. And the cringe level, by the way, is quite real on that account. I mean, seriously, wholly and fully shiver with the knowledge that you're reading some of the worst slop humankind could have ever created. But we all start somewhere. I was bad at writing, but that's okay. I was just starting out. I didn't take in as much as I should have from what I was reading, and didn't think too long on form, grammar, or even basic structure. It was like if you took a fish and threw it on the port side. My early writing was that fish flopping around struggling for air. It just needed to come out of my head and onto some platform for others to see. Getting a bit ahead of myself. I found this site and signed up quite immediately. I don't remember if I dreamed about getting published at this point. It was a strange time in my life where I wanted to be a lawyer for a chunk of my teenage years. It was around this exact time that my desires shifted and I engulfed myself more in the literary world. I found a forum on Fiction Press that I didn't seem too populated. I was looking for something small enough to show my shitty work when I eventually got around to writing it. I was terrified of feedback and people thinking I wrote garbage, so big forums were a big no. I eventually found a forum that was perfect. I won't give the name of the forum, but I remember it clearly because it actually had an accidental typo in the title that gave it a funnier, unintended second meaning. I wasn't there for the absolute beginning of this forum, which I'll just call WU, but I was there pretty early in its lifespan. The very first thing I did after introducing myself to the locals was participate in, wait for it, a forum roleplay. Dun dun dun. Cue the screaming children. Yeah, I know. Not to insult people who like RPing to this day. Quite the opposite, in fact. Honestly, until you try, you won't just know how you can get to know someone, and exactly how creative that can be, through maintaining a long-form story. For those not in the loop, forum RPs can go quite a few different ways based on the story you're trying to tell. In our case, we each had our own characters from whatever works in progress we were working on at the time, that we inserted into a sandbox with no immediate plot. The first few hours worth of story was kind of just finding the story. Now, I didn't have any works in progress at the time since I just signed up onto the forum. I did have an idea for a story that dealt with a protagonist who was half animal, half human, called a chimera, but I didn't have a name or any details about him. I learned a bit more and became less awful. Not great, just less awful. The RP lasted until almost mid-June of that same year. There was no real conclusion, people got busy and stopped visiting the forum as often as they used to, me included. I still kept in contact with my friends in the forum though. We had other topics we talked about more frequently in our day-to-day lives, about our separate writing projects. I remember complaining that I couldn't think of any plots to work off of, and I felt if I could just get that ball rolling I could keep it going. This was when one of my friends in the forum messaged me about a story that I had. We'll call them Double D, like from Ed, Ed, and Eddie, since I don't particularly have their permission to post their name, and let me say that nickname here isn't for the reason that immediately comes to mind, you cretins. It's based on a username. Jeesh. Double D had said they had the idea for a story around a girl who was a fairy. Magic existed in the universe, and she had grown to this new world and learned more about her kind while trying to live among humans. Double D said that they really liked how my writing style was, and would love to see me tackle that idea. They gave me the go-ahead, so I went. The story was called Fable, and it starred protagonist Allison Faye and her uncle Nick. Allison's parents were brutally killed by a clan of Yosei, Japanese demons that rivaled the Fae clan. The story would start right as the action got going. Allison and Nick lived in France as a terrifying note arrived on their doorstep. It contained killer-like markings that mentioned her Fae name, which was basically a Fae's true name. Allison had just been her human name that her parents had given her to help her blend in. Legends of the Fae family say if someone were to utter your name, you'd be dragged into the pits of hell. It was an instant death sentence. So, of course, Uncle Nick finding this threatening note was an instigating sequence for what would have been a large novel that threatened death for Allison at every step. Who sent the note? Why didn't they just go speak to him directly? Why taunt about the name when you could just say it? All of this and more would come to light through the case of an epic story. Except for the fact that it was only an extended prologue to a story that eventually would have been. I never finished it. This was back before I planned and storyboarded, so even I don't know the full answers to those questions. I do know Uncle Nick was going to be in on it, so I guess spoiler warning for a character whose story will never be finished. Now, how does that relate to the book you hold in your hands now? Well, the protagonist of this novel's name is Allison Faye. That is no coincidence. While she's changed as a person, and is quite human, I assure you, she's still the same personality that I started off with way back then. She's younger, too. Fable had her at 16 years old, where this book has her starting out just 3 years younger. I felt like I could get a deeper look at how her character will grow with the younger response to the events that play out in the story. Allison is my youngest protagonist. I hope this new look at her is able to show what I see in her, and for her, the things to come. As a special treat to you fair readers, and listeners, I've included the original chapters of Fable inside this novel. It's a natural evolution. If you're curious to see where the story was going, to go in tone, writing style, you can check that out. This story is 99% preserved from its original state, so any spell or grammar errors are present in the original.
The only things I've adjusted are the formatting so it doesn't take up 50 pages of blank space. If you don't care much to see, then you can head to the first numbered page and begin Allison's true story. I hope you like it. Ryan Geever, 2018.
So, we've seen the origins of Gavin Daniels and of Allison Faye. Let's say we skip ahead to the good part. Now, from here on outward, we're going to be talking about books I wrote that I actually like. But we should learn something of how these stories are framed. For a long while, I didn't have a lot of comparative operators for how my stories fell in place. And so it was hard to tell people exactly the angle I was going for unless they were already invested. As of this point, I have 2 sets of stories, the Radical-9 Saga and 12 Monoliths. And with each of these series, each book inside takes place within the same universe, but isn't necessarily a direct follow-up. There are some stories that are direct follow-ups, but it's not a guarantee. I used to say it's similar to Stephen King, how similar ideas and characters may appear in novels that they're not introduced in, but I've since found a more recent example that compares even closer. The Legends of Heroes series of JRPGs. For those familiar, the Legends of Heroes games, specifically the Trails games, all take place within the same continent, but there are different arcs that focus on different nations and main characters over a short time period. So in certain games, you'll see recurring characters and plot lines and even events that'll crop back up, and conflicts can even pick up and resolve over a number of games, but each individual game tells its own unique story. My books are similar to that. Each novel contains a standalone story from beginning to finish, but they contribute also to a larger, overarching global story. So the more you know, the more you can pick up on. But you can effectively start with any one novel with very few exceptions. August 27th, 2012 was a date that I mentioned before, and it's because this is the date when I started writing my very first full-length novel. This was the beginning of Radical-9. Radical-9 is a very special story to me, and the original form of this book has grown so much into the novel that it is now. Originally, this novel went through some name changes. First and foremost, it was called Ragnarok Online for the slightest of seconds. Of course, this was immediately changed when I realized an actual game existed online with that very name. And then came the next name, which was also quickly changed, Aetheryte Online. I loved the word, but then quickly saw how prevalent it was in this hit new MMO I hadn't participated in yet, called, Final Fantasy something? This is dramatic irony for life, one says. Anyway, I decided I wanted to still keep the inspiration to Zero Escape as it was still one of my favorite stories, and those who know the concept of Radical 6 is very important in the last arcs. Plus, the ninth of the Kangxi Radicals, a listing of Chinese characters ordered from least amount of strokes to the most amount of strokes, denotes the meaning person. And at Radical-9's heart is the essence of the story and the entire first trilogy of mine. Radical-9 takes place in the year 2022, and in America quite a bit different than our own. 9 years have passed since this government's total shutdown, leaving the states on their own to take care of their own. News no longer travels across state borders, so none much else other than the rumors of how others are doing spread across the local residences. In one such neighborhood of Aurora, Colorado, the locals are doing their best to live as normal of a life as they can. The town's younger population has found solace and escape in virtual worlds. One such escapee is Andrew Kress. Andy's a fan of most kinds of games, but gravitates towards MMORPGs. And yes, this includes the fan-favorite MMO, Final Fantasy XIV, which includes the free trial up to level 60 content with the Heavensward expansion. Although, he has completed Endwalker, thank you very much. Things go awry for Andy when he partakes in a hit little title that seems to have come out of nowhere, Elysium. Coming from a group new to game development, Elysium stands out from the crowds because it comes with a virtual reality headset called the Adatech, named after the developing company, Adata. Hey now, is that red flags I'm seeing? Wee-woo, wee-woo, wee-woo. Important character name drop. Yeah, so let's break down quite a few things here out of the gate, as I'm sure you've noticed a few connections already. First and foremost, Jack Data is poised as the villain of this story, being the ultimate game master behind Elysium and the horrors that lie in hiding within. Now, since this was still 2012 and I was early on in my writing career, my inspirations were still clearly and plainly worn on my sleeve. Around this time, I'd watched the first season of Sword Art Online. I fell in love with the concept of that story, but I had a lot of qualms and gripes with the characterization, the story, and other various aspects of it, not including the haremness the story devolves into. This idea, coupled with a very real government shutdown that we had here around that time of writing, my brain started to combine these ideas. What if I wrote a story about a virtual reality video game gone wrong, but not falling into those same pitfalls I saw Sword Art falling into, but set it with the backdrop of a broken America just trying its hardest to survive? A lesson I've learned over my years is the idea of inspiration versus imitation. And I'm gonna have this clip of Nightmind's How to Make a Web Series to explain this idea in more depth because he does it better than I ever could.
This should come as no surprise, but the best way to solve the issue of being seen as a cash grab is by creating something unique. It should be different enough from the original product that just by appearance, you can tell they're not going for a rip-off act, even if the content is the same. Here are two different brands of soda based on the taste of citrus. Both are highly successful, very popular, and similar in appearance to appeal to the concept of their drink, but not nearly similar enough to confuse the two. Each brand may have citrus taste, might have a lot of the same ingredients, could have some similar approaches to the crafting of their product, but definitely have their own styles when it comes to appearance, branding and marketing, and ultimately, what they're trying to achieve when you drink them. I could tell you more intriguing things about each soda and how they're different, and you'd actually listen to what I have to say now, because you trust me when I say they're different. Why? Because I've convinced you these two are obviously not trying to be knockoffs of each other. These are separate brands that just contain a bit of the same ingredients. And it's not just my word that you're taking. You see they are different. You trust that they're different. Even if they contain the same core ingredients and offer a potentially similar experience, you are expecting different tastes. Now, look at these soda brands. What do you think of them immediately? That they're trying to look or sound similar to the brands you saw above instead of forming their own identity, right? How much quality do you expect out of the lookalikes? How much integrity do you think their creators have? Are these cash-grabbing hacks looking for the money and fame someone popular is making? You'd better believe it. But maybe, if you opened all these sodas, tried them all, you might discover one of these knockoffs tastes better than its peers and what it's trying to mimic. You might actually stumble onto a godsend soda, but you wouldn't know that because it looks like a boring cash grab. Had it tried to form its own identity and prove that it's not out to steal money by confusing old people, you might have tried this, and it would have been up here competing with the big boys and gaining respect instead of down here in the same trash can as the knockoffs. This is your situation as a creator seeking to make material heavily inspired by something that came before, especially if it includes a monster that other people have used over and over and over again. Half of the solution to the cash grab prejudice audiences might have is in what we just saw through our soda example. By appearance alone, before people even taste what you've made, you need to be unique. You need to stand out. Even if you've got similar core elements or the same ingredients, your branding needs to say, I am a peer, not a knockoff. I have my own identity. This means the name of your project, the profile images that you use, the way you title your uploads and associated material, even the font that you write in for the images that show off your brand. Point blank. If you're afraid of looking too much like your inspirations or those doing what you want to do, you need to be the person who walks into the wedding with a bright blue suit in a sea of black. We got the audience member to look at us. They have seen we might be unique and will give us a chance. But how do we get them to know that we're different? Beyond looking to pull in money through their appearance by tricking people, many knockoff brands also try to make their product taste as close as possible to what they're ripping off. This way, they can market the same thing under a similar appearance and steal consumers. If you're a frugal old lady at your local second-rate market chain, you might absolutely love this idea. It costs $1 less for the same garbage your grandkids drink and tastes just like it, so they can have the bargain brand. Works out for you. In the field of art, people want exactly the opposite. Tasting the same thing under a different label or appearance is boring, and in the field of art and fiction, there's no bargain hunting aspect. If you come across as way too similar to somebody who's already on the scene, why would the audience even bother switching from the content that showed up first? You're not offering anything new. You're just doing what somebody else already accomplished, and they probably do it better than you. Sure, your intentions might be good, You're not trying to be a knockoff, but you weren't nearly bold enough to offer a new experience. You're just another cop show. So, let's carry on with our soda brands analogy to tackle the issue. I started using it as a quick comparison, but it turned out to be so much more appropriate than I realized. This is called organic creativity, and we'll learn about that much later. Nobody interrupt me, I am having a good time. So, we've got our original 2 citrus soda brands from the first example. They have curious people pulled in, they look different so they've established their own identities, and most importantly, they taste different and perform different functions when consumed. So now they've got an audience. They're both carbonated and sugar-infused byproducts of lemons and limes, but they're as unique in comparison to each other as they can be, and people can like each one for what they bring to the table. This drink is caffeine-free, and while pretty fizzy when you taste it, is also pretty smooth. You do get more of the impression of a soft drink, as weird as that term is. It tastes like lemonade turned into soda and feels way more suited for complementing meals, enjoying relaxing afternoons, and giving yourself a reward for a long day of yard work at your grandmother's house. This drink does have caffeine and tastes like it's been spiked with sugar and a weird mix of edible acids. It feels a lot more suited to embarking on a day of adventure with friends, late night mischief, giving yourself a quick spike of energy if coffee isn't available, and being reckless or irresponsible. You also feel strangely more enticed to buy a video game you aren't going to play for more than 2 hours after a few sips. Anyway, 2 entirely different experiences produced using the same core material, lemon-lime flavor. How is that possible? It's all in how you mix it up and what you add. Same exact thing for web series. There will always be staple ingredients in this field for the type of series you want to produce. Your main ingredient will be whatever it is that directly ties you to another project that already exists. Say, Slenderman. If you want to create a Slenderman series, he is your main ingredient. Here's the usual way to utilize him, some common practices people generally go for, and perhaps you'll adopt just a touch of those for the effect you need. But overall, your job will be figuring out how to use this ingredient in a new way. A better concentration, a different way to incorporate it in the product, maybe pair it with something else and twist up the flavor. Most people use 2 teaspoons of Slenderman. Maybe you'll try 3 and find a way to evenly distribute that much of them in one serving. Perhaps you'll go for lower or higher concentrations of symptoms experienced by those being haunted. Turn the flavor from slow and creepy to scary and exciting by adding more horror fizz and fear carbonation. Change up the mixing process and rearrange recipe steps, use a blender, add a hint of vanilla, and okay, actually, you know what? This analogy is getting just a bit silly now, so we'll stop right here. I think you understand my point. It's not going to work to do something as well as somebody else by flawlessly replicating a specific action they took with a main ingredient that you both have. It's about how well you pull off something with that ingredient they'll be jealous they didn't even think of. Have you ever seen one of those videos displaying 100 uses for Coca-Cola? That's the game you're playing. People already know you can do a trick with it by dropping in a few Mentos, but bring something new and crazy to the table, like using it to eliminate tough rust stains, and now I'm paying attention. Show me Coca-Cola trick number 101, something I haven't seen while scrolling through Facebook. Then take that approach and use it for everything in your series. Character types, relationships, locations, courses of action, the way you shoot your video, how the characters relate to their audience if they're experiencing and uploading events in live time. Yes, you can have similarities to other series here because you're making a soda. You're creating a mixture of ingredients in different concentrations. And like I said, some ingredients are staples that you just can't avoid using. Unless you're really, really smart and pull off some crazy substitute. But that's where the excitement in all of this can be found. Yes, I am absolutely skittish about anybody taking the yellow path, because I fear for their emotional well-being in the face of the challenges that we've outlined here. But thinking about all the ways that you can take something old and overused and spin a new, exciting creation out of it gives me life. I'm pretty thrilled just thinking about it now, talking about what you can do with it, these crazy courses of action you can take, the tricks you can pull. Make me a new citrus soda, brew me an incredible new flavored coffee, give me a cop show that puts these knockoffs and hack jobs to shame. I don't preach being original and unique because I severely hate one type of media approach. I do it because trying to push through a mosh pit is a much worse experience than finding an open space with a good view. I hate seeing people suffocate among all the bodies trying to reach the stage for a big show. But if you can pull off such a tough act, if you can make it to the front where the ones who got in line first for the show have been since the opening band, my respect and admiration for you will be immense. Do something new. Even when your core component or approach isn't original at all, do something new with it. Be unique. Take the lemons and the limes, grab the sugar and water, and mix it up into something astounding you can put your own label on. Are there other sodas who use the same ingredients? Yes, but they didn't do it like you did, and maybe now they'll wish they had.
Anyway, shoutouts to Nightmind. Go subscribe to him if you're interested at all in any sort of writing or online web content. He does amazing deep dives into stuff like that. Now, I believe my work on the Zero Tetralogy is direct imitation, as while there are a few ideas here and there which aren't directly lifted from Zero Escape, the by and large DNA of the story would not exist without Zero Escape, almost directly. Radical-9, now, utilizes the idea of a virtual reality video game in a similar way to Sword Art Online, but diving in, you see immediately there's different blood running through these veins. The Western slant and the alternate history of the world outside and the exploration of the world outside through Andy's younger adopted sister, Jennifer, show more of the experiences I wanted to tell from my heart and mind. Inside Elysium, Andy meets up with a slew of colorful characters and faces many different conflicts, including but not limited to the nefarious Python Guild, territorial gatekeepers of the various floors that range from the heavily armored Eldon, a powerful beta tester, or even the multi-headed Orochi, to his own personal failings and growth as a character. Andy is a character I see a lot of my old self in, and a lot of failings Andy has were failings I myself had to work through as a person growing up. Of my main protagonists, I would say Andy is the most susceptible to fall prey to repeatable problems, although no matter what, he always tries to work to correct them. Next up on our book timeline is Telos. This story is one that I wrote a bit more confidently after the end of Radical-9, as this is where largely the revived elements of Zero come forward. This story was originally titled Year Zero, in homage to the original story, but I've since retitled it as Telos, which is Greek for motivation or end purpose. This is a prequel story that takes place 4 years before the events of Radical-9 near Denver, Colorado, and largely serves to fully explore the motivations and end purpose of the villain of the previous novel, Jack Adada. Telos stars one Gavin Daniels, who is scavenging across his old college campus. The place has been abandoned after an explosion in the science building. The environment started to mutate heavily, leaving behind the husks of people who acted more like beasts, Gavin dubs vultures, as they pick apart the bodies that were left behind. Exploring with nothing but a sack on his back, he manages to find some small comfort in the contents of his old room, being largely undisturbed. It isn't until he meets up with an old student who has a similar idea of finding resources in the building that Gavin once knew, but didn't heavily associate with, that he decides to pair up with her, expecting he can at least benefit from the exchange. However, a few things early on come to light to the reader. First, something's seriously wrong with Gavin. His mind trails on tangents frequently, and in an unhinged manner. He seems like he's kept himself together using a string and maybe 2 paper clips, something no doubt related to the traumatic nature of the childhood death of his 2 parents and his stay in foster care. Second, mentioned offhand on a Netflix program that nearly fails to load inside one of the dorms, it is revealed that this is an alternate history, where England became a major global superpower after the Second World War, and has general jurisdiction of the remnants of the American government post-collapse. Suddenly, a masked intruder bursts into the dorm and kills that other student, and knocks Gavin out before taking them with them. Gavin wakes to 2 strange voices talking about him and peering through his bag. These voices belong to Thomas Hadley and Gracie Jackson, and they seem to be gathered together inside the innards of an old ship. These names may have survived from the original drafts, but their entire characters and arcs have been completely reworked, and both act as foils to Gavin's more reserved and brash personality. Remember back when I said that Gavin as a character acts on emotion rather than logic? This is more apparent here, and at first, he isn't a character that you really like. He's snarky and pushes other people away, even so much as scoffing when one of his unwanted companions ends up getting killed on the ship. He's solely looking out for himself. And it's only when the remaining survivor makes an offer with Gavin to explain the medical diagnosis he'd been keeping close under lock and key for cooperation in making it through the rest of the area together. He's not a willing teammate or a collaborator. If he had any say in the matter, everyone else could just fuck right off. At least, that's how he is at first. coming to terms with his condition, and what life has in store for him in the second half of the novel, which has him learning about the innate supernatural abilities that allow him to send his mind to different points in time, work harder to crack that cold and hard exterior, to reveal the sad and hurt soul within, finally getting him to stand in those good old shoes of destiny, before a final confrontation with Jack-A-Data in a battle across space-time, which honestly is one of my favorite scenes that I've written to this day. Of course, by final confrontation, I mean final for the book, as of course after the events of this novel, Jack would immediately shift gears into preparing for the events of Radical-9. And the end of that book and this book end at about the same point in time, with the two protagonists working to meet up with each other to confront Jack once and for all. Which brings us to the third book in the trilogy, Dreamer, which is the only book of this original trilogy to retain its original name from beginning to now. This story takes place 7 years after the end of Radical-9, and 11 years after the end of Telos, and is told from multiple points of view. For new protagonists, we have John Baker, a 16-year-old kid living in a troubled household in upstate New York, who has a prophetic dream at the end of the world in a month's time, and Sarah Newman, newcomer to the local high school, who seems to have a similar prophetic dream she sketches out in her art pad. John and Sarah meet together to try to piece together the mysteries of their dream, as a mysterious masked man named Micah works from the shadows, pulling strings and staging events just right, until they cross paths with an older Andrew Kress and a strangely same-aged Gavin Daniels. This is explained in the book. And crew, including the characters who are following Andy at the end of Radical-9. They reveal that they have been searching for John, as he is the son of one of the scientists who had been forced to work under Jack-A-Data during the initial terrible experiments and ensuing Elysium project, and they know that he is a target. The story moves forward from here as John is captured by Micah under Jack's orders and is to be prepared to function as a new host, as Jack's body is long since near decayed due to his corruption and testing. Sarah, Andrew, Gavin, and the others must then travel the country to reach them in time before the prophesized day of death can come true. So, here we stand at an impasse, as the next novel that I wrote is not the next chronological step in the timeline. I've been wondering to myself which way to tell the story. The book that I wrote first, or what would make sense for the timeline. I figure if I'm staying true to myself, then I'll discuss these in the order they were written, but there's one that I'm going to talk about at an earlier point. It's just not at this point yet. With that said, I will say that the last 3 novels that we just spoke about were all written, rewritten, and rewritten again over the course of 2012 to 2015 time. As they were my earliest novels, I grew as a writer, and I went back to expand and grow my original ideas with a more refined voice and talent. So if you're ever confused on what is the most current, up-to-date version of my novels here, they'll be the versions that denote them as anniversary editions. These released 5, 7, and 9 years after their original release date, as I've gone back and expanded on them from their original selves. And this is why I've generally used their updated covers to show them off here. Since those rewrites happened for the majority of 2013, 14, and 15, my next story was something I wanted to make was large. I felt good after completing a trilogy, and so I wanted to expand, go so much farther out. Throughout my first year of college, I spent so much time brainstorming and plotting the next novel I would write. It was also around this time that I started playing Xenoblade Chronicles X, a game whose writing I heavily enjoyed, but was left wanting more by the story in general. But there was one aspect about this game that just stuck with me. In the game, the name of the organization you join up with is dubbed Blade, a faction of humanity operating on a foreign planet as they work towards survival, a literal Xeno Blade, as it were. Now, this organization is an acronym, and that acronym differs based on what version of the game you're playing. In English, it's Builders of the Legacy After the Destruction of Earth, which is a little clunky. However, in the Japanese version, this acronym is Beyond the Logos, Artificial Destiny Emancipator. Now, that is a catchy title, but what does it mean? Well, logos here is Greek. It means word of God or will of God. So, beyond the will of God, artificial destiny emancipator. Or, in layman's terms, no matter what God intends, we will forge our own destiny. This here stuck with me so hard I wanted to use it for a book title, and thus was born Beyond the Logos, which I was able to use for a neat double entendre, as beyond the physicality of the logo itself lays the text as a full Easter egg toward its origin, artificial destiny emancipators. So, following suit, I wanted to write a sci-fi space opera. My previous novels were contemporary mystery and sci-fi to a point, but with a more slant on fantasy. So not only did I want to challenge myself with scale, but also with genre. And so was born the planet Sayre. This existed as a cultural hub for plenty of new alien races and creatures amidst a star system far from the planet Earth, especially because Earth was now destroyed. Yeah, remember that part where I said the Radical-9 Saga stories all exist in the same universe? Well, this story takes place in the year 7423, and the main character is you. This story is written in the second-person perspective, akin to old choose-your-own-adventure stories, as that is initially what it began life as. I was building it as a text-adventure game that would feature multiple endings that the sequels could build off of, sort of similar to how Mass Effect handles your choices loading in from previous games. Of course, this at the time was more ambitious a project than I could handle, so I dialed it back to a set of 3 novellas that formed one whole novel. Beyond the Logos was written for the audience that liked to read, but books tended to be a bit too long-winded nowadays, so I packed in central stories in about 100 to 150 pages for each of the 3 episodes, and each episode picks up directly where the previous left off. This is that exception where you really can't start with episode 2 or episode 3 as your first book, as you will be heavily confused. Now, back to the prompt of the story I mentioned before. You wake up in a body that you are unfamiliar with. It's human enough, but you're not on Earth. You don't remember necessarily who you are, but you know you're not this. Stepping outside of the building that you're inside, you find a gigantic bipedal cockroach-looking monster approaching you. So, you defend yourself, or at least you attempt to. You've seen these sort of things in movies before. You don't know if they have the ability to save your skin here, but sure as hell aren't going down without a fight, and you manage to defend yourself. You manage to fend the creature off, but suddenly you realize you may have fucked up. Its cries were of confusion, pain. Even if you couldn't speak its language, you could understand enough from its tone. Immediately you're locked down for the assault of a Sayarian citizen. The strange ground you've been walking on has recorded your crime in broad daylight. Everything is confusing, and you wonder if you're going to be put to death as you're hauled into a cell for temporary holding. Until another human comes across your gaze. You call out to him, asking him for help or information. Confused, he looks at you, then realizes you're speaking the dead language, and dusts off his translating software before opening your cell, opening the back of your head, a feeling not lost on you, and slotting something inside, and suddenly you can understand him. You're not a human. You're some sort of cybernetic android made to look like a human, and you've just installed the newest language chip. The man, Jesse Anderson, works as your attending officer and questions you for the crime, but comes to understand your plight. As strange as your tale is, he senses you're unlikely to be lying. Still, though, you did just commit a very blatant murder of one of the Kai people, so you'll have to be judged by the Order of the 12, who are the 12 leaders who represent the multitude of races that coexist on Sayre, such as the avian-esque Falzayar, who is led by Ziar, the eldest Falzayar, or the draconic Yelshins, led by the black-scaled Yaldabaoth, or, more interestingly, the Messians, who are a race of humanoids that originated from the Tetros galaxy, led by one Piskar Oxet. That Mr. Jesse Anderson, who has taken an interest in you, is a Messian, for your information, Or, more interestingly enough, the human leader, also known as the last living natural human, Andrew Kress. Dun dun dun! Yeah, so that's where I'm going to leave this story synopsis here, but there are certainly connections to the old trilogy that hide under the surface here, and mysteries include a mysterious race of sentient machines named the Dromedans, as they launch a full-scale invasion of the planet, the cause of the Earth's destruction nearly 5,000 years ago, and just what in Sam Hill has got Andrew motherfucking Kress alive and wrinkled with obvious age here in this story. All that and more await in this set of 3 episodes that are also compiled into one novel dubbed The Complete Edition. Next up, we have a short story dubbed Brave New World. As this takes place directly after the events of Beyond the Logos, again, this is not a story you start with. Especially, this is taking place directly after the choice that is made at the end of Beyond the Logos, in which a universe is set to be restarted in order to prevent a total apocalypse. Brave New World is an epilogue that details the lives of several important characters in the new history, and is a send-off to the Radical-9 Saga, as it is the last story to take place chronologically within. It is not the last story to be written in this universe, as there's one more which we'll get to right now before we move on to the next series. So, this next novel was written in the latter half of 2021, but since what remains after is all the stuff for 12 Monoliths, I think I'll cap off the Radical-9 Saga here with A New Dawn, a Dreamer epilogue. This story has been sitting in my drafts since 2014, and it was finally published on September 8th, 2021. It has been built on and started and stopped and started and stopped and restarted and stopped and started for nearly 8 years. But finally, it is out. This story takes place in quite a few different time periods, as there are 4 different point of views that novel floats between, 3 of which I'll discuss very briefly, and the 4th one I'll keep secret. First is the point of view of Andrew Kress. This is the year 2032, 3 years after the events of Dreamer, and as the new President of the United States, he has gone through a lot over the course of the trilogy, and has had a lot of misgivings over the lives he was unable to save. So this story is a very personal look into his psyche and the lengths he is willing to go to protect those he loves and try to correct his past mistakes. And is also directly the story of what happens to the Earth for it to end up in the state that it does by the time Beyond the Logos begins, and is also exactly why he ends up where he does, as this fact is merely only hinted at in Beyond the Logos itself. Second is Jake Carraway, who was a side character in both Radical-9 and Dreamer. He is Andy's younger sister Jen's close friend, who was the son of the Aurora, Colorado police chief. He has grown through a lot of growth over the zone over the past 10 years, and his story is one of travel, as he and political rival turned ally Matthew Avery, the son of the previous English diplomat the Queen had deployed in order to establish the States, visit the Queen herself on order of her request. Andy vies to stay behind to keep a handle on the resurging power at home, as it is more than clear that the Queen was responsible for Jack Adada's growth to power throughout the Radical-9 trilogy. So, all suspicions on her invitation on being anything but a power move are aught but zilch. So, this fragment of the story takes the characters to the growing utopia of the highly advanced superpower and investigate those claims and invitation. The third point of view is the story of a young boy named Larry George in the 60s who receives a tape recorder for his birthday. But strangely, the tape isn't playing music, but instead a voice speaks to him, guides him, and soon forges a contract to be Larry's guide for life. All 3 stories will intersect and be joined by a 4th secret point of view that fully reveals the secrets this world has hidden deep inside and leads directly into Beyond the Logos 5,000 years later. And that is it for the Radical-9 Saga. It is a tale of tragedy, and how that tragedy inspires new tragedy until those with the power and motivation to end it stand up to the cycle. And honestly, sitting here on the outside, now having finished it, I'm proud of the work that I've done. Is it perfect? No, my earlier novels definitely still have growing pains, but I'm going to work to have this content available for YouTube for free in an audiobook format. But considering there is nearly 1,000 pages to record, this is going to take me some time. It is, however, all available for free over on my Wattpad, and it is also available in paperback and hardcover on Amazon if you want to help financially support the series. Next up is my current project, the series that spans multiverses and unfictional ARG content, 12 Monoliths. The first 12 Monoliths novel was in the planning stages for the latter half of 2016, and all of 2017 as I was plugging away at finishing Beyond the Logos episodes 2 and 3. And was the single largest time spent planning a single book at this point. The book that came of this is Good People Die, named after the Japanese name of Zero Escape, Virtue's Last Reward. Extreme Escape Adventure, Good People Die. The title here is stylized so you can read it in multiple ways, and all of them are valid. Good people lie, good people die, bad people lie, bad people die. I fully accept any headcanon for what the title of this book is. Although, since I do need to have an official title to be able to sell the book, it technically is officially Good People Die. But you know how things are. I accept all headcanons. Good People Die as a story is interesting in the fact that it originally began as a fan rewrite project of the third Zero Escape title, Zero Time Dilemma. The concept for the death game was a spin-off of Virtue's Last Reward's Ambidex game, but with my own flavor on it to make it something new, thus dubbed the Roulette game, where players play an iterated version of the prisoner's dilemma, but their decisions affect more than just the person next to them in the circle. It all comes around. The story evolved, and I decided to lift the roulette game and thrust it into this new novel, which became Good People Die. This story stars an amnesiac young boy who is told his name is Lucas Gray. He wakes up in some derelict facility that opens to a large expanse of a room the size of a football field, and in the center is a circle of chairs. Completely ominous, but feeling overly exerted from what he was doing prior, he sits in one of the seats. And too bad, too! Wires jut out as they sense his presence and restrain him to the seat, and he's injected with something that causes him to pass out. When Lucas wakes, the other chairs are filled with 5 mysterious other characters, although one of them, an old woman, has been shot in the head. Lucas learns from a mechanical rabbit named Lucky that descends down onto them that they are in progress of the roulette game, and that the old woman's death means that somebody had decided to defect against the group in the previous round. And now they were almost ready to begin the next phase of the game. The game itself has 2 rounds. First is the exploration phase, where the players are let free from their restraints and are tasked with investigating one of the 6 rooms that sit on the perimeter of the arena. Each one is themed after one of the players and their lives before they arrived here. By investigating, they will be able to find the key to continue within the second phase, as well as secrets about that person. The decision phase, where each player will resume sitting in the seats and vote to cooperate or to defect. Players who cooperate will be rewarded with a digit to the password that will allow them to escape when they have obtained all of them. Of course, this is assuming you live after the fact, as in order for you to take advantage of cooperation, other players must cooperate with you. If someone were to defect, the next person clockwise to cooperate will be killed, and that defector will gain double the amount of password digits in return. So when the old woman dies, she had cooperated, while Lucas had defected, which confuses him greatly, because he doesn't see any reason as to why he would have defected. But then it was revealed that in the previous round, every single player had chosen to defect, except for the old woman, whose name is revealed to be I. This story follows many twists and turns through the mysterious facility, and the origins of the dark creatures that will come to be known as the Creatures of the Night, as well as Lucas's fleeting memories. After the completion of this story, I wanted to partake in a genre I hadn't fully dived into, but loved to read, and that was the murder mystery. But of course, I wanted to have my own personal flair on the genre as well. So in 2018, I began plotting my next novel, The Corpse of Icarus. This was a special novel for me, for quite a few reasons. First, it was my chance to bring back a character all the way from my very early days of writing in Allison Faye. I've made it no secret that Allison is my favorite protagonist I've written, and it all starts here with this novel. Of course, this is also special because this is the first novel where the only protagonist is a girl. And she's also my first confirmed bi-protagonist. Allie's journey throughout this novel is one that echoes many young people's journeys, I feel. Those who don't fit in by any standardized metric into a young school-ground environment. A heteronormative environment to someone who is bisexual is already a challenge enough to navigate, as these young minds are exploring what it means to exist and like themselves and others. Couple that with the extra ostracization that comes from being the new kid at school. Triple that with a school that has a very obvious divide. Quadruple that with the fact that Allie's been pushed through the foster care system for all of her life. And finally, top that off with a murder that comes straight to the heart of innocence. Two of the kindest kids at Nassau Middle School wind up at the center of an atrocious crime. That's where Issachar comes in, though. One of the creatures of the night, he interferes with the school itself, transposing a dark barrier over the limits of the school to prevent outsiders from entering, and those inside from leaving. He says that the true culprit is among them, and while he knows who it is, he doesn't say, as he fears it'll contaminate his experiment. He tasks the children with outing the motivations so that the culprit can face true justice. The school is sealed off to prevent outsiders from preventing said true justice from happening, as adults have tainted views that would only muddy the waters. And so, the students must investigate the events, all while the true culprit tries their hardest to thwart any such attempts, without being discovered. This novel and the next are similarly resonant to the two Radical-9 stories, in the fact that they will both end at the same point in time, even though they started from two totally different points altogether. And to talk about the future of this series, I'm going to need to bring up the collapse. After the events of the Corpse of Icarus have concluded, there is an extremely important scene in which Issachar sits atop Mount Sinai. He prepares for a task that was given to him by his father, a mysterious being only known as Z1. He uses the collected energy that his younger sister Sakana had collected during the course of Good People Die to begin the collapse, which is a collapsing of the multiverse into one singular existence. Infinite timelines layered on top of one another, drastically changing the landscape of the planet, and those with especially determined willpowers can withstand the transition into the new world, all else be shed into nothingness. The events of the fourth 12 monolith book will pick up after the collapse, as has happened, and begin to explore this new world. But I wanted to clarify that the first 3 books of 12 monoliths are all backstories. Good People Die for the boy who goes by Lucas, The Corpse of Icarus for Allison Faye, and then our third character. Child 423 was started in the latter half of 2018 and formally released in January of 2019. It stars William Wallace, a young boy who has a strange power to have his mind thrown into other people's consciousnesses, typically moments before they're about to die. He realizes very quickly he can control said person, and as it continues to happen to him throughout his life in the 80s and 90s, he tries his best to save the people he inhabits from their certain deaths. He's not always successful, but the attempt is at least made. The thing is, though, is that as life goes on, he spends more and more time in each person's head, arriving earlier and earlier before their death date. But when his job is done, he returns to his life the moment he left it at the exact moment in time. William Wallace is now 39 years old, and he's been in the heads of 422 people, and he is sick of being forced upon the hero's role. He's sick of his life being torn away from him, out of his control, so he vows the next time it happens, he's gonna find the quickest way to kill whoever he inhabits, so that he can go back to his own life. The next day, he wakes up in the eyes of a young Daniel Aldoon, a grade school kid who is sitting in the bath. This'll be easy, William thinks to himself, and immediately begins grasping at his legs, An innate strength more than the boy ever seemed to muster urged within him, and he managed to break Danny's flimsy legs. He starts bleeding out in the bathtub. But not before Daniel's drunken mother stumbles in and notices her son in a grisly state that he's in. William feels Daniel's essence fade from his body, and he's ready to let his mother grieve for her child. But something's wrong. He's not going back. He's there, staring back up at Daniel's mother as she carries him out of the tub, calling the emergency line, bringing him into the hospital. He can't move. His connection with Daniel Aldoon was severed, but he's still here in the body, and this is not how this is supposed to happen. But then again, what really did he have back at that old life of his to want to go back anyway? The thought enters William's head, and suddenly he has an idea. This could be a new beginning. This could be his do-over, to live a full life that he'd stolen away from him. And so, he inhabits the personality and name of Daniel Aldoon. His body heals over the next few months, and Daniel returns to school, attempting to reclaim his younger years. But oddities never seem to stop following him. His teacher, a young man named Mr. Kress, hands him a copy of the summer reading that he'd missed out on, and finds that it's an eerily accurate description of his own life, including the decision that led up to where he was now, although Daniel isn't directly named in the book. Who was writing the story about his life? They'd certainly been following his trails. He had to figure this out now. They probably knew something about why he was cursed the way he was. And so, the rest of the story has William discovering the secret of his own abilities, as well as the aftermath of the collapse on the world as his class is visiting the local underwater amusement park, the Crestfall Resort. With all three characters primed up, and not necessarily on the same side, we turn next to the book that took me the longest time to write. 2020 was a tough year. I don't think that there'll be anybody where that statement will be false for. And especially since I was working then as a warehouse worker for Target, I simply did not have the time or energy to put into forward writing into the 12 Monoliths series. I had a lot of planning and storyboarding in progress, but nothing actually putting words to the paper in manuscript format. However, thus began the time in which the 12 Monoliths ARG was born. I had always had a desire to work in the ARG space after devouring projects like Ben Drowned and Everyman Hybrid Online, but it was always a later thing. I knew I was not prepared enough to start a project of my own in similar vein, and I also did not have a story prepared, which is sort of a death knell for long-form nonfiction. However, as 2020 brought us back the resurgence of the Ben Drowned ARG, I got inspired to finally put my plan into action. Around May 2020, I had begun work on this YouTube channel with the fire that continues to this day. I had always here and there done YouTube stuff, but it was more bursts of passion and sharing gameplay and Let's Plays and the like. But I hadn't truly found my niche yet. That changed when I started to work on the Ben Drowned Explained series of videos. Clearly it resonated with people, as it is to this day my most popular content. I found a flavor of video essay that fit into my nature to talk at length about my hyperfixations. And this style of video would continue into other topics such as Eye of Somnium Vows Explained, and the ARG of such game and its sequel, Hidden Bats Explained, and even a Pokemon offshoot channel where I can relax a bit more and talk about my love for the underappreciated parts of those series. But all that is after, as a direct follow-up to this Ben Drowned Explained series happened during what was the premiere of one of my explained videos. The content of the channel was hijacked by a mysterious force the players grew to call Green. In reality, this was a creature of the night who had not yet appeared in the 12 Monoliths books, the Geerian. The ARG took place over a period of a year, over 3 seasons, and I have in-depth and behind-the-scenes explained videos for each season on my channel. I'll post the playlist link in the description for those interested. In short, players were able to interact with the Geerian as he explained more about himself and his siblings, and even the enemies, to which all alluded to several characters both revealed and not revealed within the books. The ARG is canon to the events of the books, but the story of the ARG is not required to understand the story of the books. There is definitely a lot of valuable character information and interactions that most definitely heightens relationships that are present within the books, but the ARG is first and foremost a support pillar, and not a main entry. So, 2020 was kind of a non-year for my novel writing, and so turned out to be the most of 2021. However, this did change. In September of 2021, I released 2 novels I had been working on concurrently. The first of which is one that we already discussed in A New Dawn, A Dreamer Epilogue. I have to say, it was really refreshing returning to characters I hadn't written in half a decade, and I think it was instrumental in me reviving my creative energies. 10 days later, I finished Become as God's Black Monolith, the 4th 12 Monoliths book. This is a big novel for me. This is a dark fantasy adventure story akin to something like the Dark Tower series. Allison Faye is the first protagonist we're reintroduced to, but she is much older. Where the original Corpse of Icarus took place in the year 2022, echoing the original year that Radical-9 took place in, by the way, this story took place in a little over 2 decades later in 2044. Allison has seen a lot in this new world, and her story is half recounting her adventures post-Corpse of Icarus, and half her journey in hunting down the dark dragon Sakana, the creature of the night that she has unspoken history with. And this is also the same one who had dark dealings in Good People Die. She wields tremendous power with her mythical lance, which is imbued with some sort of unknown magical ability that allows her to bend the metal to her whims. She is a hunter, first and foremost, and Thagarian's marking of her back in the ARG really shows itself here. The boy who is called Lucas, the story picks up directly after the end of Good People Die, in the same year, and he has now come face to face with a person who just shouldn't exist. It's a much older Gavin Daniels, who Lucas comes to know exists in a fictional set of stories that used to exist in the world. But how is he here now? Those questions are put aside as they admire a half-busted-up machine Gavin explains as the most important machine, Icarus. It is an infinity engine, which, when completed with its missing components, dubbed the Fragments of Icarus by Gavin, and similarly noted as the Monoliths by Sakana on Allison's side, it becomes clear that those who control the monoliths have limitless power over the fabric of the world, and that multiple parties will be searching to lay claim to the fragments. William's story takes a major backseat in this novel, as his fate is left hanging in the air, but we'll go over that in the next novel. Both sides cover half of the novel, and it sprawls decades of history in this new world at new faces. Those who inordinately strong wills seek to make their lives as much as they can. So too do our main cast. Now, the next novel in the series wouldn't release until April 2022, but there were 2 more ARGs that launched in both celebration of finishing these stories and because I'm always yearning to find new ways to tell new stories. The first of such is Vermilion Chronomalies, which was exclusively run in the 12 Monoliths Discord server. And bam, I held off for an entire hour before plugging the Discord. Ha! Well, this was a choose-your-own-adventure style story that ran sort of similar to a mini D&D session, although inputs were limited to N64 Zelda inputs, such as using an item or equipping a mask from Majora's Mask. These were used to solve various puzzles for a man named Zane, who found himself in a bunker with no memory as to how he got there or what lay in wait for him. The next was less a game and more of an interactive short story that played out over the in-character Twitter account, dubbed Of What Remains. Now, unlike the first ARG, I will say you will not find complete summaries of this information here on YouTube. However, if you are interested in the events that have happened, these events have been fully canonized and play out inside the next novel we'll be looking at. And this includes the players who participated. So, this is a little cue that if I run any more short ARGs for 12 Monoliths, you have a chance of being part of the books if you partake. But of course, I make a note to get permission from each of the participants to include their likenesses as the rights to appear, so if that is something you're concerned about, do not worry. I do make sure that is done before I even begin to write anything like that. So, moving on to that book now, we have All for One Red Monolith. This I mentioned released in the April of 2022, and is as of right now the most currently released book. This continues the point of views established in Become as Gods Black Monolith, but adds in the results of William's new lease on life inside Daniel Audun's body. He becomes king of a new Floridian-based empire dubbed End for All, hosting fighting tournaments to challenge the masses by hosting his rulership on the line to entice them into entering, has become his new form of entertainment. But as his continued wins have demoralized the masses, he instead evolves the match to a full yearly tournament where the winner can expect great boons for them and their family and promptly oversees the tournament instead of participating. Meanwhile, Allison is partnered with Sakana in an uneasy alliance as her intentions in finding the dragon lie in arranging a meeting with Issachar, whom she hasn't seen since she was a child. Lucas, on the other hand, is successful in reclaiming one of the fragments from the weapons development factory that lies at the western coast, but is revealed to be only a fragment of a fragment, and the other chunks lie on the east coast. Lucas has a vision of a woman flying on the back of a dragon heading toward one of the other fragments, and so he and his new companion Laven ditch their traveling guild over the realization that two of them have been sold out on their previous mission. Allie's past comes to intersect with her future, as her initial meeting with Sakana in the past is revealed, and her latent abilities resurface in her lowest moments as she tears at the fabric of reality, appearing 14 years in the future, in the present as Lucas and Laven are investigating that very same area. Another uneasy alliance is struck, as both sides struggle to understand what has happened. But one thing is clear, the younger Allie Faye does not understand how her present-day self could ever align with the creatures of the night. So, she joins Lucas and Laven to search out the fragments of Icarus and stop them, and her future self if they have to. All this, then, of course the segments from both of the ARGs will take course and have very direct effects on the course of the story. And you have an explosive finale which I will now admit is surrounded by a tournament arc. I had to, I know. And now, that brings us to where I am now. The 6th 12 Monolith novel is currently in development. Maryland Storm Orange Monolith currently has about 70 pages and about 13,000 words written, so it's about 10 to 15% of the way complete. It probably won't be out for a bit, as life has been busy, and it's not the only story that I'm working on, but I can give a quick synopsis of what exists thus far. After the climax of the last novel, Allison, that is, the present Allison we've been following since Black Monolith, who allied with Sakana, and for ease, the older is always called Allison and the younger is called Allie. Got it? Good. Allison explores the ruins of a spaceship that has crash-landed. This same ship that the narrator from Of What Remains inhabited, and finds herself investigating the history of the ship and the inhabitants within, before undergoing a change that will probably be one of the largest changes in the series bar none. Oh, and there's this really cool AI unit designated Numa, which may or may not be responsible for the creation of the entire universe, but that's fine, you don't need to worry about that for now. 12 Monoliths is nearly half over, and there is still 6 novels left in this series before it is complete for good. Now, I've been pretty coy about this, but elements have seeped through. But the more 12 Monoliths you read, the more you come to understand that it's not as disconnected from the Radical-9 Saga as you may have initially thought. All of my public talk on both series specify that these are 2 different universes. But the loopholes of such a statement begin to show their frayed wires the deeper you go, and then you realize just how deep in it you are. Once the final 12 Monolith novel hits, it'll be the end for this story. Radical-9 Saga, 12 Monoliths, all of it. If you want to think of it as a 20-something book-long series, or 2 separate series, that's on you to decide. But at the end of the day, the interconnectedness of each one will end with Battle of the Gods White Monolith. Now, obviously I'm going to continue writing. I may write more longer and interconnected series in this style in the future, but as of right now, my shared universe of 12 Monoliths has an endpoint. That long spiel out of the way, what comes next? Well, I am working on another story currently alongside Orange Monolith, and that is going to be another experiment of mine. A long-running serial fanfiction. I enjoy Pokemon a lot, and I've wanted to write a Pokemon fic for a long, long time. I now have the ability and the pedigree to be comfortable with tackling a project as long as this is. Enter Ultima. This is the story about Pokemon appearing mysteriously one day in our world, and the effects that will have on this people and this planet itself. This story will take place over a series of 4+ arcs. The first is in the late 90s, and will focus on 2 orphans, Ren Summers and Azure Azzy Kubota. They're living in the Fox River House during the very start of Pokemania in the world as the video game's first release overseas, and the 2 boys fall in love with the world. Yeah, so Pokemon exists as a franchise in this world, and which they suddenly start to appear, and that is definitely going to have an effect on things as we move forward. Arc 1 is the beginning time period, where at first only basic stage Pokemon have begun to appear in the world. Nothing too inherently dangerous as, say, a Gyarados or a Palkia or Arceus or anything like that, but there is inherent danger in creatures who have the powers that Pokemon do. So the Global Pokemon Task Force, name not final, is created to try to round up any stray creatures for public testing and safety, and will cover about a 2-year time period. Arc 2 happens when this is taken to an extreme, and the government mandate has quickly turned public opinion on the task force, and conflict over Pokemon's rights, and erupted in many communities. Ren and a group of like-minded individuals make a plan to break into a local storage facility to free the Pokemon inside. Ren at this point is a bit older from the previous arc, nearing his mid-teens, and will tell the story of that break-in, planning, all of that. Arc 3 takes place over the course of a few more years as structure in society has reached a tipping point. Pokemon rights activists have taken to fighting back against the fascist corporations that seek to hold them for private misuse. Ren at this time would be in his early 20s and on the front lines, as he feels very, very much for this cause. Arc 4 is where the story will change and will formulate most familiar Pokemon storylines I wish to tackle. In Arc 3, the world is going to be changing greatly. Massive terraforming movements have upended society as it was and transitions it into society as it will become. And Arc 4 is going to continue that even more as the world has stabilized into a form that Pokemon fans will find familiar. Large natural reserves and environments with humanity staking their claim, with industrialized cities few and far between. Ren during this arc will begin in his early 30s and is planned to continue for as long as I have stories for. Throughout the events of the second and third arcs, I have purposefully not mentioned Azzy, as certain events in the first arc caused him to be separated from Ren, but he will reappear in his fourth arc, so you can't expect the drama to ensue from that. A third character I want to highlight is Vert, who is going to appear primarily in the fourth arc, but her backstory will be dived into of what she was up to during the last 3 arcs, as she was experiencing them from a whole different continent entirely. Now, I do want to bring focus to this art here, as these were actually done by me. Which, if you know me, is something of a miracle, because I would not call myself a visual artist in the slightest. And I'm not going to kid myself and say that these are the greatest character designs out there, or the cleanest art, but I'm proud of them. And in due time, I'm going to be commissioning some friends of mine for their designs in the various arcs in their time skips. But for now, this is Ultima. And similarly to Orange Monolith, I have about 60 pages and about 10,000 words written thus far for it. Still working my way through the first arc. This story will be freely available on my Wattpad, but will not be receiving physical copies as I do not want the Pokemon Company aiming their sights on me. Plus, with it being a serial, the format would be something I would have to work out on how many chapters per volume would release. But anyway, that aside, I'm unsure if I'm going to produce audio versions of Ultima. This is also something I still have to decide, and if I did, I would like to have a lot of art to show on screen for it, which would either be a massive time or money investment for me, both of which I don't have an ample of either to dump freely into another new project. I'll think about it, maybe when I'm caught up with my other novels' audiobooks. And finally, what I have planned for next. Here's a new novel idea that has been worming around in my brain for a little bit, called Blade Soul. I don't have more than the basic concept yet, but I'm imagining a futuristic society where superpowers are locked to digital chips and are linked to blades affixed to the wearer's arms, dual-disc style. The ideas I have are telling me it's a story of an upstart who customizes his own blade to fight oppressive societal standards and corruption within the city, but that would merely be the up framework, as I desire more of an emotional message and connection out of my characters, so this is going to be a work in progress. And that is it. That is my history with writing, why I got to where I am, how I got to where I am, and what I've done in that time. Writing to me has been a release I cannot thank enough for keeping me sane throughout all the turns life has had for me thus far. I would not be the same person today if I did not write. No matter what I am, I will always be a writer. And with that, I hope you'll stick around to hear more of my stories. I, the Somniaphile as Explained, return soon, so get hyped for that. Check you guys next time.